The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Hello and welcome to our Q&A session for the part 2 of our IFC Collaboration Exchange webinars. Let's make sure you can see my screen. Hold on. All right, just a quick check. Do you guys hear me well? All right, coming in, good report. I'm heard from the crowd, so that's good. All right, just like in the previous webinars, feel free to ask any questions on the go. We have a few questions from the past webinars, so we're going to try to address those as much as we can. Don't see yet the guys who actually asked the questions, so we'll see. Anyway, we'll stay there until they show up. But if they don't, I'm still gonna show you the few responses we have for that. So I've got a few new slides prepared for that. So let's start by going through a quick review of where we left the last time. Just getting things off the way. Again, my name is Nando Mogollon. I work as a digital design consultant for Central Innovation. We're running these series of webinars that will be listed on this website, which you can scan just by pointing your cell phone at that QR code there. For today, we have a few objectives on basically or mainly answering those few questions that came through the last time. Most of them related to the equivalence or some, misconceptions about the different origin points across different software and how that relates to the origins inside the IFC files. There was also a question on asking for instructions for a Revit user and how to set up their points. So I'll try to not actually provide with instructions on how to do that, since there are a few other factors that may get in the way on how to set that up. But we can certainly clarify how the different origin points, both in the IFC files and inside Archicad, will relate to those different points inside Revit. All right, this is pretty much what we saw last time. Again, just to recap on where we left. We were talking about origins, and we were trying to make a difference in between what we call, at least for the sake of this webinar, what we call local coordinates, which is basically a way to find a point that is closer to your building or your site that we're going to use as a reference for the sake of going on and working on the project. Those are points are typically, in terms of best practices, they tend to be aligned with a geodetic point. That is one of those points that you'll find on a survey. So you want that to be reference to that, not to reference to nothing. And that is basically what we call the local coordinates. Then we also have world coordinates, which in the case of Australia, it's based on the MGA or map grid of Australia in most cases, and that is far down in south, south and west typically from any project, and those are the world coordinates that refer all the way down to that point, which is typically a long number. In most cases, anywhere along, I still, if I don't get it wrong, 6,000 kilometers and 300 kilometers in the other way. So those are the terms we talk about. Now, that's in concept. When it comes to the IFC origin, IFC actually have a system of relative origins, mainly 3 of them. So the IFC model or file itself will have a definition for a site, which has an origin on its own. Then the building itself has an origin that can be referred back to that IFC site or back to the general file. And then you have stories, which are also related and have their own relative origins based or reference back to either the building or the site or all the file altogether. Now, this is the part where we start drawing a difference and trying to make some sense of how those different points may relate to each other and what's the outcome of an IFC file once we export or start exchanging IFC files. So what we have here is the most, by no means the mandatory way of working out this, but the most typical files that you're going to play with in the case where you're dealing with surveyors using Archicad and delivering surveys in that format, and then an exchange of files in between companies using Archicad and companies using Revit. So what you have from the left, let's start from here, is a situation where in most cases the survey will be drawn in what is called MGA coordinates. That is typically above, going north. I think I've got these right, 6,000 kilometers north and 300 to the right, depending on where you are in Australia. As you go forward north, the number will increase and so on. And the Z value will increase depending on how high are you from sea level or the AHT level. So basically that's what describes a typical survey file that comes in Archicad. Now on the other side, if we're going to use a local coordinate system with local orientation, basically you're going to keep your file closer in your building, in Archicad, closer to the origin. Let's say, as it's typically recommended, having your building on the upper right-hand side of the Archicad origin point. What you will see is a building that sits straight in your screen if you're using a view orientation of 0 degrees. Just mind you, this view orientation does not affect the export or import of the IFC files. It's just representative of what you're seeing there. So when you have a local coordinate system and local orientation, you're probably going to have that because the north point will be manually set inside Archicad. Still, your Cartesian origin inside Archicad will sit straight relative to the building. What you will expect to see on the Revit side could be easily something like this, where they also have that. They have the building sitting straight. They have what they call the project base point. And if they haven't moved anything, their project base point should be sitting say, pretty much the same position as you have your Archicad file. That is, when you're looking at that file, for those who were asking about relative equivalences in between those 2 points, if you're looking at the building inside Revit with a view orientation that's called Project North, it is more likely that you're going to see it sitting like so, right? Assuming that the project is being set in the same way that you set it in Archicad by telling the file where north is pointing at. I've added this symbol here just to give you a brief idea of how they know where north is pointing. They can use symbols, they can do a bunch of things, but it's more likely that when they actually set the north, the survey point, which is represented with this symbol inside Revit, will also point at the actual north, okay? When you use local coordinates and local orientation and you're exchanging the IFC files in that manner, you will be using, in both cases, an export of the IFC that relates back to, in the case of Archicad, to the Archicad origin point. And in the case of Revit, it's an export that sets back the IFC origin to the project base point, because you also have the option to use that survey point as it's described there. The result of having that on an IFC file will be that the IFC will be sitting X, Y, and Z right there when both files had shared their origin, right? So there's no mystery there. It's pretty much what you have is what you see on the IFC. So that's the most simple situation. Then comes other situations where it might be advised that you use local coordinates. So you're still using your 0 point or origin point in Archicad really close to the building to avoid problems with inaccuracies and bad geometry. You still have that close to the file, but you're using a real world orientation. In this case, you're not manually setting up the north, but rather you're orienting the views so that the building itself will be looking or will be sitting in real world orientation. Then for the sake of documentation, you very likely just set the orientation of your views such that the building will be sitting straight up. If we were to mimic that on the side of a Revit model, what you're going to see is pretty much the same thing we saw before, but then this time you will be looking at a different type of orientation of the views, where now instead of following Project North, they're following what they call True North. In that case, what typically happens is that the base point origin will be sitting where it was before. Although you have to remember that in Revit, there are two things that might not be evident, which is the project base point and the internal hidden 0 point that are sitting on top of each other. If they haven't moved that point, then the two of them will be exactly the same, which is in most cases the most recommended case. We won't expand on that since that will take us into some other factors, but we can explore that if we got that coming in as questions. And then what you typically will see on the screen is that green and red arrow actually, when you select the project base point, telling you what's the actual direction of the building, like so, and the true north will be pointing north, like so. It's kind of the equivalent of having your views oriented on I don't know, that could be like 35 degrees or something. So these two situations are somewhat equivalent. The difference is you will set up north either by orienting the views, or, like I showed you before, by simply telling Archicad where the north is pointing at. The outcome, if you export an IFC file with this setup in your files, when you're using a local coordinate system, so it's an origin that sits closer to the building, but with a real world orientation, like so, then you're going to get an IFC file that sits closer to the building, but with the building that is being oriented as in real world coordinate systems. In that case, north is still pointing up to the y axis, but the building will be looking what it should be looking at. Those are the two cases that you're more likely to be using when you're exchanging files for the sake of coordinating design and coordinating models for 4D, 5D, and construction purposes. Now, there will be a situation where you will need to deliver a file that is sitting in real world coordinates and world orientation. That will be exactly mimicking what happens in the AutoCAD file. It is not recommended for the sake of exchanging files, because you get you need to start getting along the you need to start getting bringing in workarounds just to make it work, to make sure that you don't have bad geometry reflecting in your files. But it might be the case that it's requested by the client or for other delivery purposes. When that happens, then if you're mimicking the file like so, in Archicad, if you still have your file sitting closer to the origin, it's not that you're going to work now far away from the origin. The only thing is that now you're going to use the survey point and locate that far, far away down, south, and west to mimic the origin point of Archicad. That's usually minus 6,000 kilometers and 300 kilometers in the other way. This is a value, similar thing. In the case of Revit, same thing applies. Similar things apply. They just need to use either what they call shared coordinates, or they just set the coordinates for their own file. In both cases, what you will expect to do is to export your IFC files based on those survey points, both in Archicad and Revit. So the export gets done right in the file from the point of the survey, right? The outcome of that is that you're going to get an actual file inside the IFC file, as we saw the last time, that is actually sitting far away from the origin. Most IFC software don't have much of a problem with that, IFC viewers, I mean, since they can also use the local origin of the site to display the geometry. So that, in some cases, can be used without much of a problem, but it is not recommended when you know you're going to be exchanging files with other beam authoring tools like Revit, but could be, if you're including anything else, Tekla or Space Gas or DDS CAD or ETABS or whatever else comes along. Now, that's not the only situation where you may find that that happening. It could be also that it's a little bit weird, but it could happen also, where you will be working on your building straight up. You're using a north that you have set manually in Archicad, like so. That will be what you will see if your view orientation was sitting at 0 degrees. And then in that case, you'll use a survey point that follows the project north. You'll still be located down south. You just need to be careful that now you need to account for the orientation. So you won't be measuring relative to your Archicad user origin. You need to measure relative to your survey point so that you can get these distances right. Hope that makes sense. Basically, X will be measured from this point going that way, not going completely horizontal, just to get the location of the file correctly. And on the side of Revit, similar thing, they'll be using their survey point for export, regardless of the view orientation. It only matters for the sake of visualizing here what you will expect to see if you're looking at the same thing on the other side. And again, you're exporting from those 2 points. The result of that, it is actually the same. You will be exporting files that are sitting inside IFC in the real world coordinate system and with a real world orientation. Okay, there needs to be just a little clarification there, which I think I didn't do the last time, but I'll try to do it this time. Which is when you have your building file inside Archicad, if I'm using a local coordinate system as I'm using here, but the local coordinate system has been moved by me simply because I was given a different coordinate system than the one I started working on. Then I've used that survey point not to represent the real world coordinates, but only to move and relocate my Archicad origin for the sake of the export, nothing more, right? That'll be the case where I'm just going to place that my survey point somewhere around the building, even though it's not that far away from the origin. So that won't be the only situation in which I'll use a survey point. So the last time we placed a survey point there, and we received an IFC file, which I also have imported there, like so. The IFC file, if you look at this, you remember that we're using this little cube to represent a geodetic point on the IFC file. That tells me that this IFC file, it's likely to be using a real world orientation, since I can see the cube being rotated. But if I go and take a look at the coordinates, let's take a look at that. You'll see that these X, Y, and Z points are relatively close to just 11 meters and 26 meters from the zero of the IFC file. That tells me that this is using a local coordinate system for the location of the file. Actually, I believe I said the wrong thing, because the file itself, looking at this, it's actually using a local orientation, not the world orientation. You can see my grid line sitting straight on the IFC. So this is a situation that is kind of the equivalent to doing this. You're getting this file out of producing a file like this, either from the origin point or because I have moved or used the survey point closer to the file, but sitting straight with the building. Okay, so I've got that. I've got both local orientation and local coordinates. If you want to test this, it is recommended that you do it simply by exporting a piece or a part of your file. No need to export everything, since you're just testing that things will fall in place. So if let me see it like this. There you go. So let's say we've got our incoming location file in IFC format there. I want to test that the file we were preparing will land in the same place. You can do that so fairly quickly simply by selecting, let's say, that slab in there, which should be sitting in the same intersection as those grid lines. That was the intention of drawing those grid lines there. You can use any other element if necessary. I'll use that. And because I have that survey point there, and because I'll export this using the survey point as a reference, my slab should be landing exactly at the intersection. Again, you'll do that by making sure that you have a translator that uses either the origin or the survey point. In my case, I'll use one that is being preset with the survey point. There's a bunch of other items in here and settings that we won't be talking about now, since the only thing that we're discussing will be this orientation and location. So I'll be using the survey point. That's why I've got a preset for the geometry conversion and a translator dedicated just for the sake of exporting geometry at the survey point position. So that should be exporting this file, having that as an origin. So let's go ahead. Just gonna go and save this file, and I'll save it based on the survey point. Let's call it architectural test location. Selected elements only, that'll be enough. And just gonna go ahead and export that, let's say on that share folder where I have my other IFC files. All right, if I go back here and add that file I've just created, what I will expect to get if I switch on the grid lines again, there you go, will be a slab that it's sitting straight with the grid lines if I have it there. So if I keep that setting for further exports, depending on what the both data and geometry is being required from me, then you'll get a building that sits straight into the right place. Okay, so that's that. Additional comments on the IFC files, real world coordinates. We already saw that. One additional comment on the survey point. We're not getting too deep into what specific instructions you get on the side of Revit, because they can use multiple different ways in how to move either the project base point, the survey point, and those two can be moved either when something they call clipping or unclipping, and they all have multiple combinations with multiple different effects. And mostly because we don't want to drive the whole exchange to please the Revit parties. We need to please the common file, which is the IFC file, and whatever was mandated on that file, that's what you want to follow. All right, don't have any more questions coming in, so we'll probably just going to be closing the webinar pretty short. So anyone else with any questions? I'm just going to leave it there a couple of seconds, see if we have anything coming in. All right, doesn't seem like we have too many questions today. So remember, we'll have these recorded on the MyCI. So feel free to join in if you want to watch the recording for this. Other than that, we'll see you then next time. And on part 3, which we're going to cover, well, by the way, important help center articles that may help you investigating these even further. Article 64173 and 183 are pretty good on that. Specifically, the one that talks about IFC Exchange best practices. You can download that as PDF if necessary. Again, feel free to join our support team by sending them an email here in Australia or New Zealand in both emails displayed on the screen, or give us a call to the numbers on the screen, the support hotline 1300-873-246. For non-urgent matters, you can always log in your tickets through MyCI on the website on the screen, both Australia and New Zealand. Thank you very much for your time. On next week, we're going to jump into the next stage of this, where we're going to continue with the exchange of files. But then this time, we're going to start including all the things that tend to be involved as communicating issues across the different files. We're going to start getting that involved because I want you to see how the survey point that we use inside Archicad also plays a role when we use what it's called BCF files, which I believe you're familiar with. So that also plays a role when we're using that. So thank you for your time, and don't forget to register to the next webinars, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.